Okay, great. Rabbi Burton, thank you very much for coming on the Philosophical Jew podcast. Would you be able to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Shalom Davachai, it's great to be here. I love to see the kind of work that you're doing. My impression is that you're exploring the big ideas, the important ideas, in a fearless and original way, which is why I'm particularly excited to talk to you today. So, about myself. Is that right? Would you agree with that characterization?
I don't know about fearless. I feel like sometimes I hold back on posting certain things to.
Well, so do I, which is why I was looking forward to this conversation, because I think people who are at least trying to be fearless can gain from meeting each other and talking to each other. That's my feeling.
Agreed.
But you didn't push back on the original, so I guess you agreed with that. I said fearless and original, and you only questioned the fearlessness. So original is also good.
Yes, I think that I try to be a little bit more original.
Yes, originality is so important because it's weird, because Judaism and maybe religion in general, but the Torah, it's conservative, right? We think we have what we need to live properly, to access the truth. On the other hand, we have this fundamental notion that we're still in exile, that we haven't been redeemed, which means that the core essence of the Torah has not been unlocked. So I find myself trying to navigate those two contradictory themes. I lean a little more towards the redemptive theme, looking to unlock the Torah, but at the same time, there's a tension there, because of course we have to honor what came before us, and everything is. We're not creating a new Torah, but we have to unlock the meaning of the Torah. So there's that.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, but that's a very good point. That is like a tension that I suppose we all feel, even if we don't verbalize it.
Yeah. Anyways, I think you asked me about myself.
Yes, I have two of your Kisvei Rambam, but I want everybody to be more aware of like the various things that you're involved in.
Okay, so quick background. I grew up in Brooklyn, went to typical yeshivas here, studied then in Israel and in Lakewood for a little bit of time. Then I moved back to Brooklyn, where I served as a Maggid Shir in Yeshiva Space Yosef for a number of years. Then I was a Rosh Yeshiva for a few years in a small yeshiva here in Flatbush. This brings us back now to about 10 years ago. That's when I started, approximately, I'm bad with time, started working for ArtScroll as a senior editor, or what they call a reader, which means I review the review works before publication, review them for content. I worked on the Drushas Haran, and currently working on the Kisvei Rambam. As you mentioned, we put out 2 volumes, and we have a third one that we're working on now. I also work on them on Taisus with ArtScroll. I also engage a lot in my own writing. I published 3 svarim, most recently Haaretz Shara Eka, about the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. And I write a lot on my blog on apologetics. What else? And I give a number of shurim. I give a weekly shir on the Moreh Nevuchim. Rambam, I consider Rambam my Rebbe. Yeah, I guess that's enough of a summary for now.
Well, that's quite a lot of items you're working on. I would love to pre-order that 3rd volume of the Kisvei Rambam. That's quite a lot. How did you get involved in the ArtScroll, as a reader?
Right. So actually, I was invited there by a friend who was the principal actor on the Drushas Haran. A friend of mine, Yehuda Kilson, who approached ArtScroll with this project, and he brought me on to the team as a reader. So since then, I've been working with them on various projects.
Okay, got it. So that's like what you do outside of the blog. Also, like Unapologetics is your blog, and you also have the podcast, which is it also called? It's not also called Unapologetics, is it?
No. I think you're referring to the one. It's just what I call that one. And that's just, I think it's called Seeking Knowledge of Hashem. I think that particular series that I did with Zev Lowy, which we hope to continue doing. I sometimes post that on the blog or on YouTube or on Spotify. I have the great sources.
The great sources. That's
Yes.
what it is.
So the great sources in my podcast, where I have a number of shurim on, or series really, on hashkafic topics, also about Eretz Yisrael, various series of lectures, and also I have another series called The Secrets of Chumash, where I post a weekly Chumash here, which has now been ongoing for about 11 years.
Wow.
And that is actually, that studying Chumash Be'in has essentially really been the inspiration and source for my original thinking that we'll discuss today. And the focus on Da'at Hashem has come from simply studying Tanakh Be'in. And like on its own terms, of really starting Tanakh again, trying to see what the core message is if you don't bring anything to the text, if you try to really look at the text and say, what is this trying to teach us? That's been a project of mine for 20 years, I could say. About 20 years ago, I said to myself, what would happen if you started reading Chumash, fresh?
Mm-hmm.
Like really pushing away all those natural tendencies to read things into the text, the things that we think we know because we're trained to think a certain way about the message of Chumash. What if we approach it with fresh eyes? How would that look? And that was actually the genesis for my first two books, which were rooted in Chumash. Even my book about Eretz Yisrael is very much rooted in that kind of learning, because the subject of Eretz Yisrael is obviously, besides being a halachic subject, is also very much an Aggadic subject and a Tanakh kind of subject. So that studying led to those books and to a decade plus of an ongoing weekly share.
Yeah, I feel quite connected to this methodology, I have to say, because when I did my gap here in Israel, I went to Eish Gesher, and in Eish, which is an Eish HaTorah's post-high school program. And one of the students of Rav Noach Weinberg, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Eish HaTorah, his name is Rabbi Resnick. He wouldn't mind me sharing this, that he told me that it's a chiyuv for every Jew to learn Tanakh. And, it's sort of jarring to me because I never learned Tanakh, but I made sure that I went back to the Chumash, and my goal was, okay, like in a sense, no commentary, just Chumash, just Nach. I want to know what's going on. Even the translation obviously is a commentary, but you sort of pick up on how different people translate different things, and but the main message we're going to talk about today is what you gain from the text of Tanakh, which is Da'at Hashem, the knowledge of God. And this is just such an important and overlooked, in my opinion, topic in all yeshivot, in all areas of in all areas of Jewish learning. Just Tanakh needs to be re-emphasized in such a monumental way. Like this shift needs to happen, and needs to happen now. So
I could not agree more with that. Yeah.
I'm glad. So I guess we'll get into the Da'at Hashem series, and I'll start by saying this. You begin your Da'at Hashem series by saying that man's ultimate mission, it's not wealth, honor. It might not even technically be meaning in a certain way. It's not even mitzvah performance, but the message that we get from Tanakh is that man's ultimate meaning is Da'at Hashem, to truly know God. So I know we can't, but al regal achat, can you explain what Da'at Hashem is? Like, what is it? And what how does it matter today? Right.
So basically, that statement you just made is paraphrasing the verse in Jeremiah, where he says, "The rich man shouldn't take pride, boast in his riches. The wise man shouldn't take pride in his wisdom, and the strong man shouldn't take pride in his strength. Rather, the only thing a person should take pride in is knowing me," says God. "Because I am Hashem, who does kindness, justice, and righteousness in the earth." So what the Navi is saying is that the only thing that's really valuable, the only thing a person should be proud of, is familiarity with Hashem. And let's talk a little bit about that word, dat. Often translated as knowledge, and I do translate it that way because that's the most straightforward, maybe in familiar translation. But it really means something more like experience or familiarity. And that's why when the verse says man knew Eve, so that's not a euphemism. That means simply he had experience of Eve. He was intimate. He was familiar with her, but experience. So Da'at Hashem might be best translated as familiarity or experience of Hashem. So the prophet is saying that the only thing a person should be proud of is having experience of Hashem. And if you think about that, it makes perfect sense. because given that all that is Hashem and his work, the person who has experience of Hashem is the person who is, to use a colloquial term, he's tuned in to the ultimate reality. He is on the same wavelength as being, as reality as it is, while the person who doesn't have that experience of Hashem is someone who is unfamiliar with the true nature of being. So let's say we can illustrate that. A lot of times it's useful to illustrate things by taking an extreme example. Let's say you have a person who completely misunderstands reality. It's easy to see that person, although he might be subjectively happy and in his ignorance, he's fundamentally has nothing to be proud of, because he's doing something. He's living a life that's completely inconsistent with being. Say a person, let's say, believes in destruction as being his ultimate value. He has this concept that the world is a destructive place, when we know it's not. It's a creative place. It's a place of being. It's a place of growth. Let's say he has this hallucination, this mirage in his mind that the world is a destructive place, and he lives his life in accordance with that. So he's living a meaningless, a purposeless, a fundamentally purposeless life. I'm not talking about on a subjective level where he might be convinced that this is valuable, but in a true philosophical sense, that person who is living in a way that's completely at odds with reality has nothing to be proud of, and he will be cut off from eternal being, or to borrow the term from the Torah, Bakaris. Someone who's not living in a way that's consistent with reality as such as it is, has in a fundamental way nothing to be proud of. While he who really gets it really has what to be proud of, because he's on Hashem's team. He's living in a way that's supportive and consistent with reality as it is.
That's very fascinating. Like, there's so many thoughts in my head about this. Like, one is, I feel like a lot of people, I mean, obviously myself included in a lot of ways, feel very confident in their approach to life. And it's entirely possible that, like, just like you're saying, like, they're living in a way inconsistent with reality. So in the end, like, maybe not kares the halachic and, lawful way that we think about it, but kares in a way that you're detached from the universe is really occurring despite the confidence. It's sort of like Lahavda, like, take two different approaches. Like, there's the people who are like the Maimonidean rationalists, who will say, like, rightfully so in many ways, that, like, you have to be aware of the science. The science, like, gives you the perception of the world that is coherent with what we're discovering, what God allows human knowledge to discover. But, some of them eschew any type of mysticism. And in a sense, like, if you don't get the awe of the world, like, if you can't allow your mind to understand that the world has this enigma to it that just science cannot touch, that, like, no matter what neurons are firing, and, like, making you perceive that it's a mystical experience, like, there still is something about this esotericism in reality that, like, is part of reality. And, like, both schools of thought will, like, sort of, look at each other and, like, try to stay away, but you kind of need to blend both, right? Because, like, ultimate reality is too complex for any one school of thought. So Da'at Hashem becomes this very complex thing. It's
sure.
multifaceted.
Yes. It's interesting because in a way, the prophets, who are the messengers of Da'at Hashem, and it's an important point there, because I mean that in a very literal way. This notion of knowing Hashem or being familiar with Hashem as being the ultimate end is not present in the Torah. And that's a remarkable thing. It's a remarkable thing that the one thing that the prophet says is the only thing that a person should be proud of does not appear in the Torah. The Torah teaches to know that Hashem is God, but it never says know Hashem or be familiar with Hashem, which appears tens of times in the prophets.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so that's really important. We can talk about that if you want, but I wanted to comment on your point about esotericism. The prophets, in a way, are the ones who anthropomorphize God, as we know. They give God a human form. They talk of him as having human characteristics, and in that sense, they're making God familiar. They're making him less mystical. They're bringing God near to us, and they're sort of saying that the universe, as in God's actions, has a moral character. So the simplest way, and this is why the prophets took that path, the simplest way to think of Da'at Hashem is to think of Hashem as a human and his actions as the kinds of actions that would result from human characteristics. And of course, to be clear, this is just an exercise of how to think about Hashem. Of course, Hashem has not have human characteristics. As the guide, the Rambam, the rationalists will never stop reminding us. This is all a parable. But in order to feel at one or at home or familiar with God and his actions, you need to familiarize him. You need to bring him down to human level, give him a human form. Where therefore the prophets say, okay, just think about what if God was a human being and all the universe were his actions? Well, what would his character be? How would you when you see a mere person, you analyze what he's done, what he or she has done, then you think about, okay, now I know their character. Well, here we have God's actions. So what kind of person is he? And in that sense, they're really, what they're doing is they're making God familiar, not mysterious. So it's non-rational in the sense that the Rambam will always remind us that it's a parable and that there's an element of God that's completely beyond knowing. But it's the way it's bringing God to bring us to Da'at Hashem is by making God familiar, as if he had the character of a human being.
Interesting. So there's the prophets make it a mission to give people a framework with which to understand God via his actions. And the only way you can really relate to a being via its actions is by, like, for us, it's by anthropomorphizing God as a human, in this sense. In the sense of this is like the perception of ultimate reality, I suppose.
Right.
So that's
right.
That's
While if it wouldn't be coming from human kind of characteristics, propensities, if we would just view the universe as just being something that maybe is rooted in God, but not in a human kind of way, similar to the way we would make decisions, then we would have no way of relating to it. We'd be unfamiliar with it. Our familiarity with the universe comes from our anthropomorphizing.
Okay. I think I see where this is going. There would be no other way to relate otherwise.
Right.
Okay. Interesting. Fine. So I guess one of the dangers that can occur, as mentioned earlier, I'll sort of try to hone in on this a little bit more. One of the dangers that can occur is that we don't really have prophets anymore. So whereas the prophets were able to, perhaps tune into God's action and see it clearly, I feel as though now we don't really have that opportunity. So I guess to make the question a little bit clearer, if Da'at Hashem is this thing that the prophets described as God's action through human terms, but we no longer see God's action, how do we come to know the perception of ultimate reality in a real way and not just like a psychological trick of some sort?
Right.
I'm assuming the prophets had that. We no longer have that, but we're supposed to somehow be in tune with that ultimate reality. So how would you square that circle, I suppose?
Yes. So the circle can't really be squared. And I want to bring you back to the beginning of our conversation where we spoke about essentially redemption and that the Torah's message is not unlocked. And by that, if you think about that, what that means is that really to access this knowledge, familiarity with Hashem that the prophets are advocating for, we do require prophecy. So you can't talk about this in its fullest sense without considering the possibility of prophecy. By that I mean to say, the way you drew it about, okay, there was prophecy, now there isn't. If you look at it that way, then perhaps the teaching of the prophets really should not be engaged with. And I want to go back to the point I said earlier about the Torah not teaching this familiarity with Hashem. That's very important because in an important way, when there's no prophecy, there's still law. So the Torah, which doesn't teach that you can be familiar with Hashem and know Hashem, but rather teaches in a much more fundamental way, a much more important, central way, follow God's laws. That kind of teaching is something that can carry us through a period of unfamiliarity with God, a period where we don't have prophecy. So in a very important way, this advocating for Da'at Hashem, which I think is truly important, is essentially advocating for a return of prophecy. And we're going to be fearless here, right?
Yeah.
That is the fearless statement. I mean, there's no, you cannot square that circle. But I will say this too. I don't think it's as stark as you put it. Like there was prophecy and there wasn't. I think we have to think about what is prophecy. What was lost? Was something lost? Is it a matter of degree? I don't view it as this law, this Xeris Akos of like God decided there's no longer any prophecy, and therefore we shouldn't even engage in the prophetic paradigm. I don't think it's like that. We can explore that more, but there's a lot of different strands of it.
So I guess you're kind of, this is reminding me of something you talked about in your podcast. You describe how over time, Jewish life, we lost the art of knowing God, and we replaced it with performance, culture, or community identity. So how did this shift happen, right? We didn't, let's say prophecy is not gone. It's just that, like we can redeem it. But how did that shift happen where prophecy gradually, I think there's a Gemara that says that the prophecy was given over to the mentally unwell and
Right.
to children.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So how did this happen, and what did we lose? What are we trying to get back?
Right. Now, I think we really have to ask, should we get it back? Because I want to bring in another aspect over here, another angle. And this is something that I don't have personally a resolution to, something I think about a lot. There's an association between prophecy and idolatry. Most explicitly stated by the Gra, who comments on the Medrash in the Seder Olam that says, in the 40th year of the Second Temple, which significantly, perhaps we'll get to this, is when the Greek Empire spread and took control of Israel, prophecy ceased. And the Gra comments that, on that Medrash, the Gra comments that when they killed the inclination to idolatry, prophecy ceased. So we have this Gemara that says that the men of the Great Assembly put an end to the Yitzrad Avodah Zarah, the inclination to idolatry. Back in the day, idolatry was a big thing. People were drawn to it. And in the beginning of the Second Temple era, they said, hey, we're coming back to Israel now, Second Temple. We're afraid we're going to do this again. Just like in the First Temple era, we could not withstand this inclination to idolatry. We're afraid that we won't be able to withstand it again. And therefore, they abolished it. And the Gra is telling us that along with the abolition of the inclination to idolatry, prophecy ceased as well. And what that means simply is that if we seek familiarity with God, then if we err in our conception of God, we're liable to do idolatry. Because if you, let's say, anthropomorphize God too much, right? The prophets knew how to do it, okay? But obviously, you can bring God to a level where it's not really God anymore, or it doesn't correspond to God's essence. And what are the rules of how we can anthropomorphize God? Well, what do the prophets allow themselves, what don't? The Rambam talks about this in the Guide for the Perplexed. But that's a something you have to navigate very carefully. If you're going to anthropomorphize God to people a sense of God, you can end up bringing God down to the human level, to the point where it's no longer God, it's no longer a proper conception of God, and that's the basis of idolatry. The basis of idolatry is seeing divinity in the physical world. And as long as we're still looking to experience Hashem, we're liable to slip into that, both because of what I said, that we're going to misinterpret Hashem by looking to experience Him, but also because there's a certain kind of passion, a certain kind of mindset of passion of the person who's looking to live with experience of Hashem. One of my essays about this, a series of 2 essays, is called How to Fall in Love with the Universe. I wrote this series of essays when I started my blog. I started it with the idea of, let me write Torah ideas without the Torah jargon, as if I'm just completely starting from scratch, because I wanted, like we're sort of stuck in the Torah terminology, and people think that we're not talking about universal ideas sometimes. We're just talking about in a certain, school, like we're in the base medrash. But no, I wanted to make it clear that like these are ideas that you can engage with. as a person, as a human being. So I wrote these essays where I would just completely talk in secular terms and not use any of the words from the Torah. And at the bottom, I would have a few references, and like people want to look up and try to figure out where I was coming from. So the ones about this particular topic of Da'at Hashem, I called How to Fall in Love with the Universe, because I wasn't talking about Hashem, I wasn't talking about God. But of course, if God made the universe, then falling in love with the universe is falling in love with God. But I'm raising this because calling it love means there's an element of passion. It's a passionate form of living when you're familiar with God's work. And passion misdirected is idolatry. And I mentioned earlier that significantly the end of prophecy and the end of idolatry coincided with the ascendance of the Greek Empire. And that's important because the idea of science, which we have from the Greeks, I mean, Aristotle says that Socrates discovered the universal. In other words, the notion that there's a universal law was not known. That concept, that there's a basic law of science, right? That wasn't known until the Greeks. So think about what that means. That means that back in the day, before the universals were discovered, if it rained, let's say, all you knew was it's raining. You just knew that. So that's very human, because you're just experiencing God's making it rain now. But once we discover that there are universals, our laws of science, things become much more abstract. And it's much more difficult to live in a state of passionate experience, loving experience of being, when you're aware of the fact that being is impersonal, because there are universals, right? But that also protects us from slipping into idolatry. Okay?
That's
so
very interesting.
Yeah. So the big question, and this question is on my mind forever, and I'm not sure where to begin, is do we want to bring back prophecy?
Mm-hmm.
And how would we go about that? So
yes, right.
Okay.
So I mean, to borrow this very famous Jewish phrase, tachlis, like how do we so that you mentioned in your series, right? Like, so how do we do this, right? Should we do this? How do we do this? So you mentioned that the prophets, I don't know if is it Yirmiyahu specifically who lays out a 4-step path, or is this like a general term about all the prophets who lay out the 4-step path? I'll say what they are, and then you can tell me. So the first step is you write in your Substack, bearing one's soul before Hashem, to like sort of make yourself so aware of your thoughts that like you're placing each one of your thoughts before God in a sense, and like, is it sort of like a ready sacrifice to go up to God in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the second step is cultivating good character. Once you do step 1, step 2 kind of follows if you do it properly. Step 3 is nurturing faith, which is like just this commitment to that type of ideal. And the 4th is achieving knowledge. That one I'm a little fuzzy on, but I'm hoping you're gonna help me understand. So can you walk us through this process and explain why the order actually does play a role here?
Yeah. So this 4-step path is essentially something I discovered through piecing together various verses, passages in the prophets. It's something I first explored in my first book called Oros Yaakov in Hebrew. And then I wrote about it extensively in the Exodus, Exile, and Redemption series on my Substack. It's not in any particular one prophet. It comes together from the Chumash, the stories of the patriarchs, most notably Yaakov, and it comes together from Jeremiah, but also Hosea, Isaiah, even Shmuel as well. And it's interesting that this 4-step path, which I really think I simply discovered something that was a prophetic teaching, like a prophetic course, essentially. I think it's interesting to think about the fact that it wasn't written explicitly in the prophets. That's just something that's intriguing to me. I feel like I rediscovered something fundamental, something that was basic to their curriculum in a way, but not curriculum in terms of text to study, but in terms of a training process. Mm-hmm. And nonetheless, it's not something that they spelled out. It's something you have to reconstruct by analyzing the text. And that's just putting that there as a interesting point. But yeah, so you described it well. The first step is, and by the way, all the steps revolve, and this is where the clues come in Tanakh, and this is where my studying of Tanakh comes in. They all revolve around this phrase, Ani Hashem, I am Hashem, which we have when Hashem introduces himself to Avram and to Yaakov. And then to Bnei Yisrael when it's time to leave Egypt, and he says, Shmi Hashem lo nodati, my name hasn't been known to them, and now Ani Hashem. So I am Hashem is essentially Hashem saying, here I am, get to know me. It's his introduction, self-introduction, right? If I tell you, hi, I am Rabbi Burton, well, what am I saying? I'm saying this, let's have a relationship. So I am Hashem is Hashem telling us, hey, I want you to experience me. I want to talk to you. I want to hear from you. And around this Ani Hashem phrase, we have all these different themes going on. And that's a clue to put together this four-step process. One of the major themes, and this is in Yirmiyah, is I am Hashem who reads the mind. So that's the first step of Ani Hashem is written most explicitly there, to be aware that you are in the presence of Hashem. And if you think about it, I mean, I am Hashem. Well, what's the first thing that happens when you get this message, I am Hashem? Well, you become aware that you're in the presence of something. Even before you know what it is you're in the presence of. You just become aware that, hey, I think, you might think you're a private person and you might think that you can live your own life, but no, there's something there, something universal, something even super universal because it's God, and you are in the presence of that. And the reason why I talk about it as bearing your soul and thinking about your thoughts as being universal is because I'm, like I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to explain these things without recourse to the terms that have become cliched. Even God himself has become a little bit of a cliche. So I want people to think about, well, what does it mean to be in the presence of God? It means to take even your most basic thoughts or emotions and say, okay, is this something that I'm hiding within my private soul, or is it something that I'd be willing to put out there into infinity of time and space? And that, to me, that's my understanding of what does it mean to be in the presence of Hashem. It means I am willing to take this thought, this action, this commitment, this emotion. I would be willing to put this out there everywhere. And the reason why I like this is because I think we're at a point in time where we have to talk about Hashem. We should try to talk about Hashem without metaphysical commitments. And you mentioned earlier that there's an important element here that it's metaphysical. But I think a lot of the power of the Torah is lost because people think that you need a certain kind of metaphysical buy-in about like the existence of God, let's say, as like its own notion. And like, you don't want to talk about the Torah until we first establish the existence of God. But I think that's a big mistake, because I think if you really approach the Torah properly, you'll see that the core teachings of the Torah, I'm not saying God doesn't exist. He does. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the path that the Torah wants us to take is a path of being attuned to something through kinds of spiritual attunement that's not based on some kind of premise of building things from the bottom up. So it's not that like, okay, well, I've established God's existence, now what? No, it's that, look, you can live this way. A person can choose to live this way where he says, look, I only want to live in the presence of God. A person can choose to live that way regardless of whether he's committed to the notion of God. And that itself is a very interesting idea. It means it says something about the human being. We can live as a God or as an angel who's in the presence of God. That's a choice that a human being has. We doesn't have to think about whether God exists or not. I think it's very important because I think we can talk about historically why that's the case, but I think there was a little bit of a wrong turn in some Jewish thought where we got really stuck in the metaphysics and philosophy of God.
Yeah, it's sort of like it's one thing to. It's sort of like we've abstracted the concept, like we've universalized it the way that the Greeks get the universal law. But it's one thing to abstract about God and another to walk with God. That's right. That's the language the Torah uses, right? Like
yes,
you have to walk with God. That's a very different type of reality that you succumb yourself to.
Correct. Yes, and it's interesting because I mean you mentioned the Greeks, the fact that we've taken to focusing on the philosophy of the Torah may be in a large part due to the influence of philosophy, and we felt that the Torah itself has to be justified philosophically. Again, not to say that it isn't, but I don't think that's the Torah's demand from us. That's not the path that the Torah wants us to take. the Torah wants to take this path of walking before God, and that's not something that requires a philosophical buy-in. You can have someone who's agnostic on the philosophy of things and still is in a very fundamental way walking before God. Okay, that's a little bit of a side point, but so let's get back to the four-step path. So the first step is this bearing the soul before Hashem. The next step is character, because what happens is, the theory of the prophets goes, that a person who checks his thoughts, his feelings, his emotions, his commitments, by this standard, will find himself doing a certain kind of actions. And will find his character becoming refined. So again, this is a distinctly Jewish thing and a non-Greek thing, because, let's say take the Greek, the concern of the Republic of defining justice, okay, the Republic of Plato. And, Tanakh doesn't define these terms. It uses these terms all the time, justice, righteousness, right? And like, wait, what does it mean? Nobody seems to care. And I think that's important, because I want to interpret it in the reverse. I want to say, you know what kindness, justice, and righteousness is? It's what a person who has the Ani Hashem consciousness, the person who cultivates that mindset, his actions, how he lives his life, well, that's chesed, mishpat, and tzedakah. That's kindness, justice, and righteousness. So that pasuk, going back to the pasuk in Yirmiyah that says, the only thing a person should be proud of is knowing Hashem, because I am Hashem who does kindness, justice, and righteousness. So it means you can know me, you can be familiar with me, and then you'll do these kinds of actions, and those are called chesed, tzedakah, mishpat, and we don't really care about defining them more than that.
Is it? I hope you don't mind me asking. Maybe this analogy is not apt, but I'm just going to try it anyway. Is this sort of making the claim that we have some sort of intuition we can attain if we pursue this almost like Kantian universalism about God, in a sense? Is that what you're coming at?
Exactly that. Yes, exactly that. Although I would say I don't even know if it means intuition. I'm not sure. That's an interesting point, which I would love for it to be explored more. I'm saying it in the passive voice because I don't know if I'm capable of analyzing this. I would love if someone would pick up this question. Exactly what you said. In other words, is the theory here that by putting yourself in the presence of God, you're going to be bringing out some sort of innate intuition? Or is it that simply there's some sort of fact that a person wouldn't do things, he wouldn't do certain kinds of things if he would universalize them based on, I'm not sure, is that based on intuition? I don't know. I'm not sure if it's based on intuition or it's just a fact that you wouldn't do certain things because of maybe shame or fear. I don't know. And then that itself will mold your character. The fact that you're committed to certain kinds of actions. Because we're talking about the most important thing and the
okay, fine. So cultivating this type of thought will prevent someone from acting certain ways. Right,
maybe because of fear or shame. I don't know if it's bringing out an inherent intuitive sense, or is it just some other mechanism? It's something that I wonder. I haven't really explored it properly.
Okay, understood. Okay, fine. So that's step 2, right? That's nurturing that's cultivating the good character.
Right. And then what happens is the third step is emunah, faith. Again, you can look in Tanakh and you'll see, you can look at these verses, you can explore my writings for them where I see this in the verses, but you'll find emunah, faithfulness in God's kindness specifically, as being associated with this revelation of Ani Hashem, of Hashem revealing himself to Avram, and to in Hosea makes this explicit as well.
Understood.
So how does that follow? Because people of good character tend to have emunah. Again, when we say emunah, people typically think emunah means faith in the existence of God. Emunah in Tanakh means more like faith in the goodness of God, relating to the point that we keep on getting back to, which is that Tanakh is more about moral character of God than the metaphysics of God, or God's existence.
By the way, I just in my mind, I hear the atheist Reddit community lambasting this type of reasoning. I just like only because I know that I've heard you and your Talmud. I've heard the Rabbinist Talmud speak about atheism in general as a concept as being funny, but like I'm sure people would take issue with the notion, having faith in the notion of a good God as the barometer of good character. Because, for example, like for me, as like Sam Harris, right? It's to me, he's a good person. Right? Like I do think he believes in the capacity of the goodness of the universe in some way. So, is it the goodness of God, or is it the goodness of anything that's like universal? Or is it just sort of like we use other terms for God and like it doesn't really matter in God's eyes, but goodness is like the important thing that comes from having this creator?
Yeah, I go the third way. I mean, I think if someone, the last thing you said, that if someone believes in some way that the world is fundamentally good, even if he believes it's fundamentally good because he believes in the goodness of humans and he believes that they are going to make the world right, then that also reduces ultimately to something fundamental to reality, because humans are fundamental to reality. So that person,
this is fearless. I just want to say, look, I think this is.
Well, look, I didn't say that he's Jewish. I didn't say that I'll count him to a minion, or that I'll eat his shechita. But I do think that, the first parak of the Torah, first parak of Genesis repeats again and again that God saw the world is good. I think that's telling us that is the most fundamental belief, is that there's goodness. And
oh, wow.
yeah, how that goodness develops, what the metaphysics nature of God is, that's, I think, beyond us in many ways. And I don't think it's what the Torah is demanding from us. The Torah is demanding us a commitment to the goodness of the universe, which to me means there's a God. Okay. If someone will argue that there's somehow goodness inherent, but there's no God, I guess we could talk about that. But he's believing in something.
Yes, for sure.
I don't know.
It confuses me too. I just wanted to point it out there.
I've tried to. Honestly, I have tried to understand atheists, and I find them to be generally incoherent. Meaning, I'm waiting for an atheist who can make a good argument for atheism, because you got to understand it if you understand the Torah,
right?
And I haven't found that. Sometimes I think they're missing something fundamental, and sometimes I think they're just arguing about words.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a very fair characterization. By the way, I'm not saying that I would lambast this line of reasoning. I happen to agree that there's that you need this fundamental, guiding star, this North Star. I just like in my mind, like all I could hear is like it's like, but this person doesn't believe in God, and like like dot dot dot.
Right.
Anyways, I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, sure. Again, I want to make it clear. I mean, it should be clear to anyone who's listening, but I want to just state this because, in case it wasn't clear, the purpose of me taking the path that's not starting with God in and of itself is A, because I think that's what the Torah wants us to do, and B, because I think that we create this big ask for religion by starting with God, and that it deters a lot of people from engaging with this most timeless and important message of the Torah, which is why the Torah doesn't do it that way, perhaps, So it's not because I don't believe in the existence of God taken in and of itself beyond the universe, just to be very clear about that. I just don't think that's what Torah's about,
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So that third step, we're talking about faith in the goodness of God. Where does that come from? Well, that follows from the second step, which is refined character, good character. And that's because good people tend to believe in the goodness of the universe. Mm-hmm. Simple. People who are innately good tend to believe the world is good, and they tend to see the world from that lens, while people with flawed character tend to see the world as a flawed place. And that goes both ways, of course. People who experience suffering or pain and maybe were abused, they're going to develop a kind of character because they think the world is a bad place. So that goes both ways. But the way we're talking about it now is that by developing your own character for the good, you're going to start believing that, hey, this must be out there, because you're going to be so in love with the notion of the good because you're a good person and you so believe in that you're going to believe it's out there. And then the fourth step, which is experiencing familiarity with Hashem or experience Hashem, follows from that, because it's only by believing in the good that you will discover the good.
Mhm.
So the analogy from Hosea is betrothal or engagement that precedes marriage. And essentially what that means is that before you marry a woman, you commit to her. And the notion of a commitment is that you're committing to seeing to the idea that she's good, instead of just saying, hey, let's experience each other, let's be familiar with each other, see what happens. No. First, we're going to write this on paper and say we commit. Well, what are you committing to? That this is right, that this is good. So you're committing to a certain viewpoint. That's emunah. You have faith, you have belief. And by committing to that viewpoint, you're going to then interpret your experiences in light of that faithfulness. So only through having emunah will a person experience God in this way. And I mean, essentially what that's saying is you discover what you believe in. There's there's a lot of truth to that, but it might sound cheap. I want to, I think I want to point it out.
But if you're honing in on like the ultimate way to alter your psyche in order to harmonize with the metaphysics of the universe God created, then that is a very worthy thing to spread from the prophets. Like, that if I had to think of a way that to describe what prophecy should do to someone's psyche, it would be this, right? Like it would be this. Like I want people to know that like the prophets had this, this sort of like training course, as you said, and like this is the way to know Hashem, and like that is knowing Hashem and harmonizing with the universe is like very. It seems very coherent and very, one following after the other.
Right. Right. And by the way, this is how prophecy is described. The pasuk says about the prophet Shmuel, who became a prophet when prophecy wasn't common. It says Shmuel had not yet had experience of Hashem. Shmuel, term Da'at Hashem, God appeared to him and called out his name, but he didn't know that it was Hashem calling to him because he hadn't yet had experience of Hashem. So this is a definition of prophecy, having this kind of experience.
So that's very fascinating. So let's just summarize the important thing that was said so far. We earlier sort of spoke about the distinction between psychology and metaphysics, where we said that the danger, I guess, that comes from prophecy is idol worship, right? Because you tend to divine in the wrong way. And the system of the prophets is, you sort of you view your thoughts as this universal ideal, like each thought is like something that ought to be universalized, no pressure, and then it cultivates good character, right? That's something that comes across, and then you nurture the faith because that changes how you see the world, and through there, when you change how you see the world, you experience God because you're experiencing the world the way God says the world should be experienced.
That's right.
Right. That it was good. Okay, so that's fascinating. So I guess to go back to the crucial point, right? Like, should we bring prophecy back? Because are we ready to accept the dark side of the equation, which is idol worship? There are modern scholars who equate some sort of pursuit of wealth, honor, and all this stuff as types of avodah zarah, and like that's without prophecy.
Right.
So. And in the generation we live, where like our progress is just outpacing our capacity to reason and reflect, is this even something that we should pursue attaining again?
Right. I mean, and there's even a more basic question, which is that are we going to decide whether to pursue it or not, or is this something that's happening?
Right.
Okay.
right.
Because really, it's a very important question. It's really important to think about the fact that the world, let's say post-science, let's say we would re-engage with prophecy, it would not be turning back the clock. There's no way to turn back the clock on philosophy, on universals. As I was mentioning earlier, that the whole notion of universals, notion of science, makes the world impersonal, essentially, in a very important way. And that is sort of the antidote. As I mentioned earlier, that's the antidote to the inclination to idolatry. We're not going back to that, okay? We're not going back to idolatry. But for the same reason, maybe we can't go back to prophecy. So, I mean, the question is not, the important question to me, and this is something that I'm exploring in my work, Exodus, Exile, and Redemption. In a fundamental way, we have to think about what are the steps of history, of Jewish history. We tend to think about it as like, okay, once upon a time, there was prophecy. Prophecy is gone. We want prophecy back. See, that's a very strange sequence for God, for history. One step forward, one step back, and one step, going back, go forward again. Clearly, one would think that history is supposed to progress. Jewish history is supposed to progress. The classical way of thinking about exile is that it's regression and it's sin, and we want to get prophecy back. But as we're discussing now, there's a dark side to prophecy. And because there's a dark side to prophecy, maybe it's not so bad for us to be estranged from God for a while, and for God to be an abstraction that we could approach through philosophy and science and not through passionate experience. So that's the movements of history thus far. What we need to think about, and this is something that I'm working on in this book, is, okay, what's the synthesis? How do those two things resolve? Or what's the nature of the new kind of das that we're looking for? It's not just a regression. It's impossible to go back, and we wouldn't want to go back. So we're not looking to undo what the men of the Great Assembly have done, but we're looking to either create something new that somehow blends this Das Hashem that the prophets advocated for with science or with abstractions. Either we're looking to do that, or that's something that's going to happen to us. As I said, I'm not even sure whether we're going to do that.
So that's fascinating. This reminds me of something else you said, which is like we might not even have the language to describe the next step in this progress. Interesting.
But by the way, that's why I think we have to bring back prophecy, is because we need language for the next step.
Right.
That's what I really think. That we do need prophets today, like in a very important way. Because we're also, you have to realize, obviously you realize this, we're back in terms of history, right? The Jewish people are back on the stage of history, which is clearly associated with prophecy. It's also very importantly associated with knowing Hashem, experience of Hashem, because experience of Hashem is something I explore in my works, is closely associated with land as in having control of a society, of a community. Because if you're in exile, you don't even have control of your own little community or your own city, you can't really experience Hashem. You can't experience Hashem's goodness because you're incapable of doing anything yourself. So you can follow Hashem's Torah, you can keep the law. But the idea of let's live in passionate oneness with Hashem when we're impotent, when we're bound by what the Gemara calls shibud malchus, the subjugation to the kingdoms who make their own decisions are not aligned with Da'at Hashem. So that's impossible. So there's a really important reason why we lost the focus on Da'at Hashem during exile. And now that we're coming back, we have to cultivate it again. So that's why I'm really confident that this is the time for it. And that it's necessary. But what it's going to look like, how we bring it back, I don't have short answers for that, for sure not.
Yeah, it's going to make this concluding question that I always ask a little bit more complicated. I guess we can, before that, we can look at the Jews in exile, right? We have clearly very monumental works of Jewish thought and philosophy that came to us in exile. We can use all of those as tools in this next stage of Jewish history, now that we have our land, and we can experience Hashem. I suppose my question, like the way I like to end all the podcasts really is like a practical application of what we learned. If you could gather all the Jews in one place, right? Like, maybe even all the world, but I think for this, it can be just, all the Jewish people in one place. And you would ask them to alter their outlook on life in one way, like, that sort of gets them to Da'at Hashem. Like, what would it be in 2025? Like, what would you tell the Jewish people, like, needs to be done in order to make this, mysterious next step even a possibility?
It's interesting, obviously I could tell them embrace Da'at Hashem, okay? And like in the way we discussed it, the four-step path. But I think there's something even that has to take precedence to that. And I think our problems have become so deep-rooted, like they have secondary knock-on effects. And it goes like this. I would encourage people to articulate what they want from the Torah, or what the goal of the Torah is. I think that most people don't even ask that question. They don't even ask, like, is there a goal over here? They sort of assume that, well, the Torah is revelation and we do it because it's revelation. And I think that's very incorrect. I think that Da'at Hashem precedes the Torah and the Torah is in the service of Da'at Hashem. How that's the case, we have to be a whole nother conversation, especially as I mentioned earlier, the Torah itself does not teach Da'at Hashem, it teaches law. But yet Da'at Hashem is the ultimate goal, as the prophets say. Okay, that's, bracket that question. But the fact that there is a goal and everything else in the service of the goal, that's something that I think has been forgotten. I recently picked up a very interesting book called Shalom Ba'aretz. It's here on my desk, written by a Yaakov Shoham about living in Eretz Yisrael in the time of exile, is how he describes it in his cover. And he's advocating for peace, hence the title, Peace in the Land. And he argues that our problems come from the fact that we are fractured and splintered and we don't talk to each other and things like that. And he wants us to basically get around the one table and talk to each other. And I think that while he's engaging with some really important questions, and I appreciate the book for that, I think that book showed me something which I was aware of and really sharpened it, that people are not thinking about what the purpose of the Torah is. I think there's a reason why we can't talk to each other. The reason is because even if we're all committed to the Torah, even though Jews who are committed to the Torah, okay, let's talk about those. They're not committed to the Torah for the same reason. Because, okay, I'm committed to the Torah because I'm committed to the Torah. And what does the Torah say? I'll find out. But once I find out what the Torah says, in my opinion, then I'm already, as Chazal call it, the Torah becomes like two Torahs. While if people would think about, well, why do I care about the Torah? And to me, the answer is because I want to have experience of Hashem. Maybe there's a different answer. But the need to have experience of Hashem is a human, fundamental, basic need. So if I have that need and you have that need, then we can have peace because then we're all looking for the same goal. And I think because we forgot about that the Torah has a goal, so that's even a more basic question before we get to what that goal is, what to do about it. And I think because we've forgotten that Torah has a goal, that's why we're not on the same page.
That's very, very astute, very interesting. I never thought about that, but that's a very fundamental splinter between different sects of Judaism. I
want to just make a point here, which is that,
sure,
much like the accusations you threw at me earlier about fearlessness, I'm going to be fearless again. No, not fearless. No, there's a certain fearlessness to say this because do we really want people to articulate whether they have any desires that precede the Torah? Maybe not. What if they don't? What if they don't care about this, right? So maybe you just want them to keep the Torah because the Torah says so. This has to do with what we were talking about before. The Torah doesn't make its goals explicit. The Torah doesn't talk about Da'at Hashem. The Torah, by giving us a set of laws, allows us to do something, even if we're not embracing Da'at Hashem. So by pushing back and saying, well, you know what? I want to know, why do you want to keep the Torah? We're also opening the door for someone saying, you know what? Actually, come to think of it, I don't know why. I don't really care, and I'm out. So there's...
I wonder if the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach can give us any light on what like the utility of Da'at Hashem is, in a sense, because the Torah. I'm sorry.
How so?
Because if the Torah is in service of Da'at Hashem, and the fundamental human need is Da'at Hashem, if that's a fundamental human need, but the Torah wasn't given to everyone, and Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach are generally thought of being given to all civilizations, including Jewish people. I would assume that there's something fundamental there, which also contributes to Da'at Hashem, perhaps via shortcut or perhaps via generalization.
Okay. I don't think so. I think I'm going to leave that. Why I don't think so. That might how I think about B'nai Noach and whether Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach are the end or maybe only an interim kind of.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So till they really embrace Hashem Torah, maybe their own kind of Torah. Yeah, it's an interesting thought, but I don't ascribe to that way.
Interesting. Okay. So, all right, fine. So I guess for another time, maybe we can discuss how Da'at Hashem can be experienced by non-Jews as well. Like, is it the same idea as the four-step process, or is it?
Yes, I mean that relates to, as you basically pointed out, that relates to the question of where does the Torah, which was given to Israel, where does that fit in to the project of Da'at Hashem? And if it does, then where does Da'at Hashem? I mean, the prophets say Da'at Hashem will fill the whole earth, including all nations.
Right.
So what does that look like? given that they don't have the Torah, and the Torah, if it's true that Torah, let's articulate the question here. If it's true that the Torah is in the service of Da'at Hashem and the Torah is particular to the Jewish people, then how can Da'at Hashem be spread to the whole world, to all the nations?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question. I mean, obviously we have to start with ourselves because we have the Torah. You know, we're making the claims of Da'at Hashem, so it's definitely going to be an interesting thing to see the progress of Jewish history and thought if Da'at Hashem is something we take seriously.
Right.
So thank you, Rabbi Burton, for sharing all these insights. And truly, the Nevi'im are very undervalued. To find and extract the message of the Nevi'im is crucial in the times post Nevuah, or post Nevuah as we classically think of it. I want readers to be familiar with your work, so I'm going to link your Substack Unapologetics, which has some amazing, beautiful writing, which I've really been enjoying. I'm glad there are Substacks related to this specific topic, which I will also link. And I'll link the podcast, The Great Sources. And where can people find you in general? Do you have a website, or are you sort of around the platforms?
Substack is a good place to find me. I'll give you also, I have a link tree, so everything's there in one place. That's like a website where everything, all the contacts are. So anyway, they want to find me, they can go through there. Okay,
that sounds great. Again, Rabbi Burton, it's truly been an honor talking to you and to get your insights on this very important topic, especially. So thank you for making the time.
Likewise, a great pleasure. Really a pleasure to discuss these things with someone who recognizes how important they are. Thank you, Daat Hashem. Wonderful.
Of course. Hello, and thank you so much for tuning into the Philosophical Jew podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. I have spent many months creating Philosophical Jew, but nearly a decade preparing for it. In addition to the Philosophical Jew podcast, there is also a Substack. The Substack is a platform I use to write on various topics in Jewish and regular thought in the world. Topics such as philosophy and theology primarily. If this interests you, check it out at philosophicaljew.substack.com. Additionally, you can find me on Instagram at @aphilosophical_Jew, and on X as @aphilosophical_Jew, and on Spotify for the audio versions, and on YouTube for the video versions of the podcasts. Occasionally, I do reaction videos, and have a few more coming up. If you enjoyed this content, please consider supporting me on Patreon. The link will be in the description. Have an amazing day.